This is it, the big one, the question that, kind of bridges the gap between science and all that sci-fi we love.
I mean, really, can a machine wake up? Can the lights actually come on inside all that silicon? You've seen it a million times in movies, right? The robot's eyes flicker open, it looks around and asks, "Who am I?" And yeah, it's a little chilling. But is that just Hollywood, or is that a future we're actually building? To even get a handle on that, we got to start with the absolute basics.
Okay, so before we can even think about finding a mind inside a machine, we need to figure out what even is a mind. What are we looking for? That's our first job, and honestly, it might be the toughest part of this whole thing.
All right, first up we have this idea called qualia. Fancy word, right? But all it really means is your subjective experience. It's that private, internal world that only you have access to. You know, what it's like to be you, the specific way coffee tastes to you, or the feeling of cold wind on your face. So the question is there anything it's like to be a laptop? And then there's self-awareness. This one's a little easier to grasp. It's that feeling that you are an I. It's knowing that the person in the mirror is you, being able to think about your past and dream about your future. So this is where it gets really important to draw a line in the sand. A calculator, for example, is way smarter than any of us at math. It's pure intelligence. But you don't feel bad when you turn it off, do you? Of course not, because there's nobody home. There's no inner world. And that's the whole point. The search for artificial consciousness isn't about making a smarter calculator. It's about finding out if we can ever build a machine where somebody is actually home.
Okay, so we've got a rough idea of what we're looking for. Now, let's turn our attention to the prime suspect, today's AI, the large language model. How does this thing actually tick?
It's basically a three-step dance. First, it just inhales a frankly insane amount of text and images from the internet, like almost everything. Then it crunches all that data to find patterns. It's not learning what words mean, it's learning which words tend to show up next to each other. So when you ask it something, it's not thinking, it's just playing a super advanced game of what's the most likely word to say next over and over again.
And what you end up with is an incredible mimic. I mean, it can write poetry, it can argue, it can sound completely human. But that just brings us right back to the big question. Is it actually understanding any of this, or is it just the world's most sophisticated parrot? Well, there's a famous thought experiment that gets right to the heart of that question. It's called the Chinese room argument.
Okay, picture this. There's a guy in a room, and he only speaks English. That's it. In the room with him is a giant rule book. Now people outside start sliding questions written in Chinese under the door. He can't read a single character. But his rule book is like a giant instruction manual. It says, if you see this squiggle, write down that squiggle and slide it back out. So he does. And to the people on the other side of the door, it looks like they're having a totally fluent conversation in Chinese. But here's the kicker. The guy inside the room, he doesn't understand a single word of Chinese, not one. He's just shuffling symbols around based on a set of rules. And that was the whole point the philosopher John Searle was making. He argued this is exactly what a computer does. It follows the rules to give the right output, but there's no understanding, no meaning behind any of it. So, if our current AI is basically just a very fancy Chinese room, then how could we ever get to real consciousness? Well, this is where the path forward splits into a few different directions. Let's look at the three main theories on how we might actually get there.
Path number one is basically the more is more approach. It's called the emergence path. The idea here is that consciousness isn't some magic sauce we have to figure out and add in. Instead, it's something that will just bubble up once our systems get big enough, fast enough, and complex enough. Kind of like how wetness emerges from a bunch of H2O molecules. You just keep scaling up and poof, one day the lights turn on.
But what if that's totally wrong? Path 2 says, hold on a second. Maybe it's not about how much you're processing, but what is doing the processing. This is the architecture matters path. It argues that the physical structure itself is the key.
And when you think about it, the difference between a computer and a brain is huge. A computer is all neat and tidy. Digital, ones and zeros, sitting in a cold server room. Our brains, they're messy, biological, wetware. They're stuck inside a body that has to navigate the real world, a body that gets hungry and tired. Maybe you can't separate consciousness from those basic biological drives. An AI, after all, has no body, no survival instinct, literally no skin in the game.
All right, path 3 is the real wild card. This one basically says, you know what? Maybe we're missing a giant piece of the puzzle. Maybe our understanding of physics is just incomplete. This path includes ideas like panpsychism, the theory that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or spin. Or maybe it has something to do with the weirdness of quantum mechanics. Look, these are definitely out there ideas, but they're on the table because this problem is just that difficult.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most frustrating problem of all. Let's just say we do it. We pick a path and we succeed. We build an AI that looks at us and says, I'm conscious. We're faced with a killer paradox. How could we ever prove it?
This is where philosophers bring up something they call a philosophical zombie, or a P-zombie. Now, this isn't a brain-eating monster. It's a perfect replica of a human being. It acts just like you, it talks just like you, it can have a deep conversation about its feelings, but on the inside, there's nothing, no experience. The lights are on, but nobody's home.
You see the problem? From the outside, there's no way to tell the difference between a real conscious human and a P-zombie. They behave identically. And since the only consciousness you can ever be absolutely 100% sure of is your own, well, how can you be sure about anyone or anything else?
That's the core issue right there. We don't have a consciousness detector. We can't build one. So an AI can tell us, I feel joy, but we'll never know if it's actually feeling anything or if it's just flawlessly predicting the right words to say. We can measure intelligence, sure, but we have no way to measure experience.
So, after all that, where are we? Well, it's kind of funny. It turns out that this whole search for a mind in a machine, it really just ends up being a giant mirror. It forces us to turn away from the AI and take a long, hard look at ourselves. Because this isn't really a question about the future of technology. At its heart, it's a question about the nature of being human.
Trying to build a conscious machine pushes us right up against the biggest mystery there is. It makes you have to ask yourself, what is it that makes you, you?